Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Day of the Dead, the series. Of course, this is to be Season 1, Episode 1, the pilot episode of a Day of the Dead series. Right now, at the second of this recording, this is to be put onto Sci-Fi, an app called Sci-Fi, SYFY. You can go ahead and download this app and dare, in fact, be able to watch the premiere first episode of this for absolutely free. There's no fees of any kind going into the Sci-Fi app. But I'm assuming eventually, probably after the first episode, there probably is a thing of wanting to pressure people into probably paying for other episodes. And so then you can probably go and justify going on into other apps like Fox HD Movies or some other kind of app of some kind that I've probably recommended you to use if you've been on here for a while. Or maybe you just want to go and search for a movie app that's convenient for you to be able to view any number of things for absolutely free without any kind of fees. So, Day of the Dead. How honestly did I feel about this show? Well, I feel like the pilot episode, it's really too early to tell about this show because we end up kind of focusing way too much on character development and having us interested in these stories that I can't really be interested in. Really, because sci-fi does that a lot. They care way too much about getting you interested in the characters or invested in the characters that they really don't care what the theme is or about they don't really they're not really focused on hey, we gotta keep shooting a bunch of monster scenes. No, wait, we have to take a whole chunk of time to really get you to like so and so person that's on this show because we're paying that person the big bucks and all these other things are just there. So that's what I kind of feel about this first episode. Because if you look at Eureka, Eureka goes and tries to make every episode about a certain person. Look at Haven. Haven does that a lot too. Where Haven is oh, we're going to focus on one person for this episode. Because, and it's a lot of that. It's a lot of character development. So this show, no different. So, if I were to be brutally honest about this show, there have been too many zombie shows out there. And really, honestly, for this one, it left me just very unimpressed. I was really just looking at this episode. I'm like, where actually is the zombie apocalypse here? Because it seems like you have a good maybe 5 to 10 minutes in the beginning of this episode, and you have maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes in the last part of this first episode that has zombie stuff in it. And this is a 47-minute show where you have a 20-minute bubble that's that zombie apocalypse and another 27 of just character development, which I'm just scratching my head just going, why? And the character development in this episode is not a unique or beautiful snowflake where you're just man, I feel like these characters are so relatable to me. Man, I feel like a detective is so relatable to me, or a construction worker girl is to be related to me, or a kid who's mainly just so focused on going off to college in Hawaii is just so relatable. All these characters are just not relatable whatsoever, and I guess that can just make them interesting, but not really to me. But it seems like we have too many, they're putting too many people out there for us to all be supposedly interested in them And I'm like, no, I'm just waiting for them to eventually just die off. And it seems that really we have certain people who are already pegged to eventually just either to be zombies or whichever. Like, it feels like eventually it's going to have them head that way. So why did we have to have like such a story of this character to really just have them reasonably be people that are probably just going to turn into zombies probably within the next episode, or hopefully we end up really actually uh, caring about why this person eventually turned into a zombie, because who knows, maybe they can just forget about things from first episode to second episode, because now we're like forced to now have to like, but how did we get there? Because that's what the show is kind of doing. It's like, how did we get there? Wait a minute, like, let's just not like just thrust you into something and then pull you away from it, because that's what this show basically did. It like pulled you into something just to like, but wait, how did we get there? So, like, yeah, so, but yeah, so that's all I want to say about this show so far. Just like the day zero thing, like the very first infection, where like I remember in other kind of zombie like movies where it would show you like ground zero of like, hey, like some zombie just so happened to be dipped in a vat of toxic waste, or some dead corpse thing was accidentally uh, dipped in a vat of toxic waste. Oh no, he's gonna turn into a zombie. Or like in one of the zombie movies where eventually these two guys were to open up this thing of toxic waste, and then eventually both the guys who end up opening up this toxic waste eventually turn into zombies, and then eventually all the dead end up coming back and rise from the grave. Plus, I'm not 100% sure how unkillable these zombies are, and I hope that they are impossible to kill. Like, I'm hoping we have to go through, like the movie Brain Dead, the Peter Jackson movie, and eventually just have to take a lawnmower to all these people and just mow them down, because I guess that'll be the only way for these things to actually be killed, because it seems like at some point we end up having some chopping of the head going on, and it doesn't really seem cementing that the zombie will die from that. So I'm like, okay, so these might be unstoppable zombies that, like, because I've seen like Day of the Dead, but I think it was the more current like variation of it, which I think was like a sci-fi thing, anyways. So like a sci-fi put together movie. Um, Hence why they probably had this to just like, well, no, we want to make it a bigger like importance than we did before. But anyways, because I'm sure they probably have to at some point of to give this back to the original person who wrote this at some point. So they're going to make this big, huge project to eventually get the rights back to whoever. So yeah, so like that's all I think. I think that's all that I want to say cryptically about the show. It's not quite interesting yet, but I hope eventually it gets there. Maybe, if anything, maybe people will halter about going into this show until you get my consensus on the second episode. Um, that's completely fine, because hey, like, but you'll still get to be able to watch this first episode for free and have your own opinion about it. Just be like, no, I actually love this show, or no, I actually hate this. This sucks. This show feels cheap, or something like that, that you might have your own opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and go out of my way to say that it's that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episode. So in the very beginning of this episode, we weirdly are to be like in the middle of some scene, but then they're like, but wait a minute, let's go back. So we have both these two guys that are, I guess, in this one vehicle of sorts. Both Cam and Luke are to, I guess, have had a cop car or a zombie cop on the hood of their car, and so one of the guys like, "Hey, do you think we lost him?" And they're like, "Oh no, he's still on our hood." So eventually both of these guys get out of this car and are trying to like strategically try to get away from all these zombies that have now crowded this city. And so both Cam and Luke are to run off to eventually go and find seemingly Luke's mother, who is to be politicking her way into trying, I guess, be mayor of this town. And so Paula is to arrive in this hearse car, and she's to have these two guns and firing away at these zombies. And she's to have this stupid line about like, yeah, like, yeah, my Second Amendment rights, the right to bear arms, pow, pow, pow. Like, I guess you zombies didn't prepare for that kind of thing. I'm like, I'm sorry, you think that you're, like, way too cool, and just no. Uh, so, so they all get in the car, they all drive off, and so all of a sudden, one of the guys is a spot that his father is to now be a zombie, and it's like, oh well. So that's where we stop the what is to be whatever this scene was, because they don't loop back to it by the end of this episode. So I'm like not even confused. I'm not even understanding what that first scene even was, because I'm like, are they gonna come back to it? Is it a thing they're building towards? Like, is it going to be like the next episode is just building all the way to that one like scene in the very first pilot episode? Is it going to be at the very? Are we going to build a whole entire season around looping back to that one scene? What is going to happen? Are we going to have just two scenes, like one like to be this weird like, hey guys, now we have to justify the first scene from the first episode by having it be in episode 2 or something. I want to figure out how this loops together, because I'm so confused. So now we get back to like X amount of days before zombie apocalypse is to break on. And so now I have to tell all these bajillion backstories of all these characters. So let's first off, since he's first on IMDb, let's go into Cam's backstory. So Cam seemingly is to go off to his job, which he is to be going and doing lawn work, I guess, at just several different locations. And I guess eventually he ends up ending his day at this graveyard. But so Cam is to, I guess, be going and doing some town lawn care. And so before Cam is to go off to his job, he immediately is to try to say goodbye to his dad, who is this detective. And so evidently Cam and his father are on bad terms, because supposedly Cam's father, who is McDermott, is to have found out that Cam had been accepted to this college in Hawaii, and so McDermott ends up ripping up this acceptance letter in front of his son to just be like frustrated about this, and so on and so forth. And plus, we really just have Cam, who is to, I guess, really have to kind of scrape money together to try to come up with money to do college in Hawaii. So, so eventually Cam is to go and bump into this girl named Lauren. And so, Lauren, we end up finding out, is this mortician woman who is to eventually do stuff with this body, just kind of release certain kind of things out of it, and so on and so forth. Like, I guess, taking all the blood from out of the body. And so what eventually happens is, once Lauren is seemingly done with this body, kind of prepping it for eventual funeral service, eventually what ends up happening is Lauren is to eventually talk to her boss, and she is to be told by her boss, is like, you know what, I think you're ready to eventually do an actual service. Like, I think there's a lot of potential for you to be able to perfectly pull this off. And so Lauren is like, well, do you really think that I can be like doing this kind of thing? And he's like, well, yeah, of course. Like, I think you're ready. And also, to like celebrate that I'm like letting you do all this, like, how about you and me go to the bar and like we'll throw a couple back? And Lauren's like, I don't know about that. Like, if anything, like, I'm X amount of days, like 90 days sober. And so I really just don't want to go to a bar because I'll just feel tempted. And so his boss is like, well, all the more reason to just celebrate. And really just seems like Lauren is to be pushed to seduce her boss, and it seems like that's the real reason why Lauren has a little hesitation about doing anything with her boss, because immediately she ends up telling her boss, is like, well, you know what, I really just like am not really interested in going and like banging my boss or doing any kind of thing like that, and I feel like that's what's kind of like in some way happening here. And so eventually Lauren's boss is like, well, how about this? Well, like, it seems that if anything, like, I forgot that you have like a parole officer that I'm going to need to call soon. And man, it'd be a shame if I told him any negative things about what you've been doing at this job lately. And so Lauren is like, well, okay, well, I'll go to a bar with you. The only thing that I'm drinking is like a club soda. And her boss is like, well, good enough. And so he ends up walking away creepingly, to eventually just end up eventually eaten by a zombie, and Lauren ends up finding him. And so the one dead person that Lauren was to be working on eventually is to be the person that is going and doing this funeral, and Lauren ends up having to eventually defend herself against this zombie, and ends up having to crush this zombie's head and then put a microphone stand like in the chest of this zombie. And we end up having, all of a sudden, like, the people at this funeral that are like, oh my god, that, like, you did that to my pa, how could you have done that, like, that's so awful. Or like his uncle or his pa or something, like some relative of his, goofily enough. So so here's like, now that I've gotten to that part, let's go back and let's talk about the guy that we've already been talking, that we had talked about, which is McDermott. So, and which is going to tie into another character, intermittent. So, Sarah Blackwood is to be this female construction worker, and I say that because it seems like she's the only female construction worker in this one construction place. So, Blackwood is to be sent down this hole after they have dug a certain portion down there. And so, since Blackwood is the most rookie construction worker, she is to be sent down this hole. And she ends up finding this kind of voodoo-ish, like scarecrow-ish, like dead body down in this hole. And so Blackwood is to go and tell her boss about this. And so what ends up happening is, and I think her boss name is Rhodes. Um, he ends up telling her, it's like, hey, you shouldn't have called the police on this. Like, if anything, like, we're just gonna, like, all we care about is to continue on digging, and, like, that's all that really matters. And Blackwood is like, no, like, we should report this. And, like, I've already called, I've already, like, told them about this, so we can't unring that bell. So, So Blackwood's boss is frustrated, and so he ends up forcibly sending her home. And so eventually, when McDermott eventually arrives, uh, we have this construction guy who's telling McDermott, like, "Oh, hey, it was just a dead animal. Like, it's not important, right?" And McDermott is like, "Well, I don't know about that. I actually want to see whatever it is to just make sure, because he's a guy that, like, doesn't go down somewhere to get his time wasted." So eventually, what ends up transpiring is McDermott is just so stubborn to eventually go and want to see down this hole to see what this guy, or what Blackwood was talking about. And then conveniently, McDermott is to get a call from his boss because the construction worker was going to grab for his phone so he can call his boss. So all of a sudden, McDermott's captain is to basically tell McDermott that this call was called off, that basically this guy should not go anywhere further into all this, and just believe whatever the heck anybody was to kind of tell him. And so McDermott is like, okay, this is really weird. Why all of a sudden would I be sent here and then sent away? This seems weird. And so McDermott ends up walking back to his car to see Blackwood. And so Blackwood is like, oh, hey, I guess you ended up getting called off too. And McDermott is like, yeah, that's kind of weird. And so eventually McDermott stubbornly just decides to eventually get a rope and climbs down to this hole anyways, to eventually see this scarecrow zombie like thing, and eventually is to kind of be poking at it. And so all of a sudden what ends up happening is the construction workers end up restarting to work on their digging machine while McDermott is to be down there. And all of a sudden the zombie ends up coming alive and is just like almost going to like attack McDermott. And we are to probably naturally assume that McDermott is going to turn into a zombie. And here's to wrap up the McDermott story. So McDermott was to wake up to eventually have his captain call him. And so McDermott is talking about what had transpired between him and Cam last night, about the whole him going off to Hawaii kind of thing. And so the captain was just like, you know what, like, really, how about you just kind of just make amends with him, like, apologize, like, because he's all you have left kind of thing. And so, like, You might as well just say you're sorry, because, like, I know you probably did something stupid. And so it seems that McDermott was, like, going to send him a text, but then he decided not to. But eventually, Cam was to eventually send his dad a text saying, like, hey, where are you? So maybe we can talk. So now that we've wrapped up McDermott and Blackwood and all a nice, neat little bow, because it seemed that Blackwood's superior had spotted her and eventually punched her in the face, I guess, knocking her out, realizing that she had pulled some wires to eventually give McDermott some time to get down there and to inspect what's going on. And then eventually her superior finds her and punches her and knocks her out. So now that we have that covered, let's go into let's cover the Luke slash Paula stuff. So we have this character called Luke. Of course, we end up seeing him in the very beginning of this show. So Luke is to eventually go and take a couple beers to try and give to him and his friend. And so Paula is to eventually catch Luke kind of stealing beers. And so Paula's like, you know what? Like, it would not look good on me right now to become the mayor and find out, like, on some newspaper article somewhere that the mayor's son was to go off and get arrested for underage drinking. And so Luke is like, okay, fine. And so Luke is to eventually pick up his friend Trent. And Trent's like, hey man, where's the beer? And Luke is like, yeah, that didn't quite work out. And so Trent is like, well, maybe I have like some relative of mine that could probably lend me a keg. And Luke is like, well, why didn't we do that? Why didn't we ever do that before? And Trent was like, well, because like my my relative doesn't really like me that much, so it's like it's probably not going to happen. So Paula eventually is to go off to uh, be with her husband to go and vote, and so they end up going and voting, and we find out that it seems that Paula's husband is seemingly having an affair with some other woman while they were voting, because conveniently this woman was voting at the same time that Paula's husband was, and so she sneaks uh, from one ballot box to his to go and mess around with him. And then eventually Paula is kind of just like, okay, why is he waiting so long to do all this voting? And so she ends up opening up his ballot box to end up having Paula's husband kind of frustrated, because it's like, hey, like, I'm not done yet. So eventually everyone is finished voting, and so Paula ends up walking off. So I'm just kind of curious. Like, so I'm assuming this affair is probably going to go nowhere because it's zombie apocalypse now. Who's going to care about an affair right now? And probably someone's going to end up either being a zombie or dead anyway, so what does it really matter? So now let's cover more Luke stuff. Because Luke and Trent are to eventually see kind of Cam doing some yard work somewhere. And so they end up wanting to scare him. And so they end up having this car driving really close to this tractor, almost scaring Cam to where he decides to jump off this tractor. And so they kind of do the ha ha kind of moment to this kid. And so eventually this kid goes and takes this bottle and chucks it into the back of this car where this car's window breaks. And so Luke and Trent run off to get Cam. And now they're running into this graveyard where all of a sudden, eventually, we start to have like little fingertips coming from out of a grave, but not much. But so eventually, Luke and Trent lose track of where Cam was, even though at some points they're running and they're like, "There he is!" And I'm like, "This isn't a graveyard. You can easily spot this guy, but I guess not." Like, you would be conveniently be able to easily find this guy, but like they have to point it out to make sure. Like, it's not like he can hide easily, or it's not like he's like in a crowd of numerous actual people, because eventually it will get pretty crowded in this graveyard pretty soon. So Luke and Trent give up because eventually Trent slips and falls and gets dirt on his white hoodie, and so he eventually just keeps picking at it. Like, Trent ends up keep picking at his white hoodie. He's like, "Oh man, I got a tiny bit of mud on my hoodie," and Luke is like, "Oh well, boo-hoo." So they end up just feeling defeated, and so they end up walking off. So all of a sudden, Cam is to eventually just kind of poke his head out, because he's just kind of like, you know what, like, I'm hearing some weird rumblings in these graves. I'm starting to hear things that I shouldn't be hearing. And so all of a sudden we have Cam just trying to listen to the ground. So all of a sudden there's to be this zombie hand that comes out of the grave and grabs onto Cam, and so he ends up like scooting away. And so all of a sudden we end up having all these zombies starting to burst from their graves. And so Cam, with absolutely no weapon in hand, he's not like dual wielding like tombstones and smacking zombies with them, because that would have been hilarious, right? Instead, Cam just bizarrely takes his tractor. If I said lawnmower, that's not right. He has a tractor with him, and he just starts mowing down all of these zombies that are at basically like less than knee height. Whenever any of these zombies are to be underground, he just mows them down with his tractor. And so he's just kind of mowing down a lot of these zombies for whatever reason. And eventually blood is being sprayed, and then like more and more zombies are to eventually just keep cropping up, like they're whack-a-moling, or like Luke, or not Luke, Cam is eventually have to like whack-a-mole them, or he's having to brain dead them, because basically instead of having a lawnmower, he uses a tractor to just mow them all down. So so I want to confirm. Oh yeah, so what do we have any other side stories really left to just kind of mention? I highly doubt it. Oh, we have a guy named Jay Fisher. So Jay Fisher is to be jogging, because this part of this, out of all the backstories, I honestly cared about Fisher the least. Like, I didn't like this backstory. So we end up having this jogger guy named Fisher, who evidently is to be having a wedding soon, and so he's to desperately try to call his parents to have them there at the wedding. And so eventually Fisher is jogging and trying to like listen to all these motivational things. And so eventually Fisher is to go and see the wedding prep that is going on. And Fisher's like, "Oh my god, like they ordered the wrong flowers." And all of a sudden some other guy just kind of rushes in and is just kind of like, "Hey man, like I'm saving this wedding for, our girl." And we immediately just feel like this guy is gonna try and steal uh, Fisher's girl from under him, or like I just feel like this guy is to like, unless he's to actually just be related to her, and then I'm like, oh, okay, so maybe he's just trying to be the good brother or something like that, to have like bonus points and just be like, yeah, this guy like is just not for you kind of thing. But I don't know. We'll see uh, how this character is connected to this person because that's all we really get to see of Fisher. And I'm like, why did we need to see this at all? So, so eventually what ends up happening is, so Laura had gone on and took a microphone stand to a zombie, and so all of a sudden Cam is to arrive to mention like, hey, a lot of zombies from the graveyard. They're all coming. They're all coming here to this funeral service, and so eventually people are like popping open curtains to eventually see zombies arriving. So all of a sudden Lauren is like, hey, let's all scramble downstairs to, like, we should be pretty safe down there. And so she ends up bringing them to the morgue where there's actually a bunch of zombies that are to be unlocked via this door. And so we have a bunch of zombies that kind of are smashing through these doors to eventually get released. And so Cam is now telling Lauren, it's like, well, like, yeah, I really don't think that we're going to be all safe in this room because eventually these zombies are already here, and so they're eventually going to come and get us. We also have to also worry about Lauren, who I think she ended up getting bitten multiple times, and one especially on the neck. So I'm assuming she's going to turn into a zombie sometime soon. So we have to worry about that now. But yeah, but I think everything else in this episode is actually covered. Yeah, covered within, like, this episode was 47 minutes, covered it in 36. Good enough, I guess. But yeah, so that ends up to be what all really happens in this show. Very underwhelming. Kind of hoping this show gets better, but who knows. So with that, I think I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.